February 14, 1955. Deep in the snowy expanse outside Moscow, a new aircraft looms into life. The Ye-2 prototype, the first spark of what will become the MiG-21. A jet born of Cold War tensions, meant to climb high, strike fast and guard the borders. In 1963, India welcomed its first batch of 12 MiG-21s. A new chapter begins. One that will span 6 decades of service, sacrifice, speed and transformation. When the MiG-21 arrived in India in 1963, it was unlike anything the Indian Air Force had flown. Supersonic, demanding and unforgiving. Its cockpit was cramped. Its landing speeds were high. Its glide, speed, climb were unmatched. But that came with steep costs in training, operations and patience.
Our origins are from the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force. And so a lot of our inventory was from the British, some from the Americans, and later on we acquired some from the French. But we had never acquired anything, at least on the fighting force side, from the Soviets. In early 1960s, we had just started to open our doors to the Soviets. We acquired the AN-12 transport aircraft. We acquired the Mi-4 helicopter. And this was the first time that we were acquiring a fighter aircraft from the Soviet Union. The design philosophy, the manufacturing standards, everything was different. And so that required a significant adaptability of the pilots to understand this design. Also an adoption that was required by the engineers, the technical team. A lot of the manuals were in Russia. Every country has their, or every manufacturing establishment has their own philosophies. You have to understand and incorporate those philosophies. So that was the first big change people had to work with, and that is why the IAF ended up putting the MiG-21 at Chandigarh, which is where we had the other Russian aircraft already based. And so it made sense to make Chandigarh in a way the Russian hub or the Soviet hub for us, so that they could be cross-learning from each of the other platforms that were there. The other change that pilots had to make was the speed of flying and the way it flew. As I explained to you, it was meant to be a rocket. And so the speed at takeoff, at landing, the way you handled it was very different. Anecdotal point here, but in the initial years of the MiG-21, everyone wore a pressure suit like an astronaut. Right? That just gives you a sense of what the aircraft was meant to do. Of course, later on, the need for pressure suits was dispensed with as the profile changed, as we were not flying as high in the stratosphere as it was required to be. So when the MiG-21 arrived in 1963, or the decision to buy it was taken, the Air Force was thinking, where do we put it? And they initially chose Adampur as the base. It was close to the border. Punjab is where most of its use was going to be. But Adampur was not fully built or developed at that stage to really accept the aircraft. And it was already fairly crowded. It had other squadrons operating. The next choice fell on Hindon. Hindon was a base that was still being constructed. It was not ready. If Hindon is becoming ready, why don't we put the MiG-21 at Hindon? But then construction in India takes its own sweet time, so Hindon was just not ready. And that is when they said, okay, now what? And Chandigarh was the third option, which they had not really thought hard about. Why Chandigarh was simply because from a place perspective in Punjab, it still worked. It was not as close as to the border, which also worked. But most importantly, that is where the Soviet aircraft hub in India was. the AN-12 and the Mi-4s were based in Chandigarh. So it made sense. They said at least we'll have synergies. There were a lot of Soviet technicians who were staying in and around the city, and they also need their own ecosystem. So that's how Chandigarh came about.
I think the most fascinating part of the fact was that here was a fighter. The cockpit is typically very small in a Russian aircraft, and it's sort of packed in with the instruments. But cockpit-wise, because we had flown the Ishkaras of the Polish origin, there was fairly some similarities in the cockpit. Russian instrumentation is entirely different from Western instrumentation. But my God, we really felt the difference once the aircraft, we engaged reheat to get airborne for the first time. That was the first shock of our life as to how quickly this aircraft accelerated and how quickly you had to be ahead of the game, or that aircraft would take you for a ride after takeoff. There were mirrors on the sides. So each platform, each type had slight little variances, but I think the most striking thing about the MiG-21 cockpit was the simplicity. It didn't have fly-by-wire, so though it had an autopilot system where you could trim off the aircraft loads, but it required a lot more, muscle power to fly that aircraft compared to the fly-by-wire platforms that are there today.
As threats evolved, the MiG-21 would be called upon to do more than intercept high-altitude bombers. Initially designed as a lightweight, high-speed interceptor, the MiG-21's roles within the Indian Air Force soon expanded. Ground attack, patrols over mountains, deserts, and even seas. To keep her relevant, major upgrades were essential.
The Russians who designed the aircraft wouldn't have dreamt at the kind and range of missions what the Indian Air Force flew with the MiG-21. It's incredible. We have done practically every kind of mission and all kinds of flying on this platform. I mean, we've flown right from your basic operational flying of air combat and air to ground. We did all kinds of missions. We did it over different terrains. We did it over desert, over seas, over mountains, which means you needed specific, you had to fly through a separate syllabus designed for that environment. Every terrain, we've done valley flying with it, we have done high altitude operations, we've done sea flying, we've done night flying in dark nights at low levels. We used to fly in a MiG-21 at low level with very little navigational aids in those days, at low level for strike missions, live strike missions at night. We used to go and drop armament, after a long navigation sortie of 80-100 kilometers plus, drop your weapons at night, bombs, rockets, and then come back. Then we used to do night interception missions on the MiG-21 at high altitude missions, which is an entirely different kettle of fish, and then doing it at low level where your reaction margins are very low. You got very limited time. So it was a platform. I think we squeezed every drop out of that platform, and that was the mainstay of our Air Force. It had a twin role. It had an air-to-ground role and an air-to-air combat role.
That changed the Indian Air Force pilot comfort level with the aircraft. So when you are now going into combat in 1971, which the MiG-21 found itself in combat many times, it had the missile and the gun. And depending on the combat, the situation, the pilot was comfortable that, listen, I have something. So I'll give you an example. One of our kills over Jamnagar in the 1971 war was when BB Soni flying a MiG-21, shot down a F-104, flown by one of the star pilots of the PAF, then squadron leader, Wing Commander Middlecourt. Outstanding pilot, and in combat, there is always a winner. At that time, he first fired the missiles. Those didn't hit. He then used his gun, and the gun got the starfighter, and it went down. So, and this was repeated in different combats across the Western and Eastern theatre. So the gun made a big difference. So much so that in the next variant that the Indian Air Force acquired, it was no longer an external pod. The Russians had made it integral to the aircraft. The gun remained the same, but it was now part of the design. It was not a add-on.
The true test of the MiG-21 came under fire. In 1965, its role was limited, still learning. By 1971, its presence was marked, its wings tested. Escort missions, ground attacks, and many more. MiGs confronted Pakistan's US-supplied aircrafts. Indian pilots had to innovate, both tactically and courageously.
After the 1962 war, America had actually grown closer to us. They had grown closer to us militarily. So for the first time, US fighters came to India. They did an exercise in Kalai Kunda called Exercise Shiksha. They gave us radars. And it felt our pilots went to the Top Gun school in US to train. So it felt like our US partnership is also growing. But the 65 war changed that. America was not happy that India and Pakistan went to war. And they decided to discontinue military support to us. Now put these two things together. You have a need for large number of aircraft, and you have a partner who's gone away. And that turned India in the direction of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union then put the last little thing that really closed the deal. They said, we understand that you are a nation that has limited resources. So we will make it easier for you to buy. The aircraft will be cheaper. We will give you even the loan to buy it. We will give you the ability to manufacture it locally. So HAL was given the contract. And we will train your pilots. So it was sealed. And that is the reason it was decided that MiG-21, which was supposed to be a rocket, which was supposed to have a very single dimensional role, came about to becoming the beginnings of becoming a mainstream aircraft for the Indian Air Force fleet. About 40 of them came directly from the USSR, and another 200 odd were to be manufactured by HAL locally, which they ended up doing in a period of 5-6 years. And so by the time we got to the 1971 war, we had 8 squadrons of MiG-21.
In fact, right till the end, it was the MiG-21 squadron which carried out three MiG-21s out of the squadrons. One was 28 Squadron, the first supersonics, and 4 Squadron, which carried out the strike over the governor's house in East Pakistan. They were taxing out. The last moment it was known there was a meeting being held in the governor's house, which all the top military leaders going to be attending. And as they were taxing out, they were told it was some other building, and the last moment it was told no, it's being held at the governor's house. This is as the aircraft were taxing out. So there's one officer who ran with a map to the leader of the formation and waved it to him and showed him that this is the new location. And this is after they had taxied out, mind you. So anyway, they got airborne, managed to find that place. They carried out enormously accurate attacks, which were monitored by 2 foreign journalist who wrote about the accuracy and the effects of the attack. And apparently, while this attack was on, the governor, they all hid. And the governor went under the table, actually, because of the rockets attacks, and signed his resignation at this point in time. And that is actually, it's a fact, and that is how I think they were pushed to carry out surrender to the Indian armed forces. So it played an enormous role, but also important in the role was the enormous amount of bombing which had carried out against the Pakistani Air Force, which had a Pakistani army, which had holed up to defend Dhaka in the university. So it was the MiG-21 who played this.
But in East Pakistan, what happened is the first couple of days we spent a lot of time bombing the Dhaka airfield. Not bombing, we used rockets and we were sending fighters to engage their pilots in air combat. Now, this is where the MiG-21 actually made a difference. Is after about a couple of days of this aerial combat, trying to rocket the Pakistani sabers on the ground, our side realized that it was a very difficult task to achieve. Mostly because the Pakistanis were very good at hiding, at camouflaging the sabers on the ground, and they would only come into the air when the odds were in their favor. Even though there were some battles where they really took on multiple formations from our side. So at that point, the AF sort of adapted. They said, we cannot keep sending formations just to try and engage this aircraft either in the air or on the ground. We need to put that airfield out of action. So on the fly, I think on the second day or the third day, the MiG-21 squadrons, we had 3 squadrons in East Pakistan. Group Captain Mali Wallen, later Air Marshal, he was commanding the fighter component from Guwahati. They worked out a plan where they fitted the M62 250 kg bombs onto the MiG-21s, and the MiG-21s were first used in the bomber role from the third day onwards. And these bombs created massive craters. We are talking about 40 foot deep and 100 foot wide craters that you really cannot fill within a day. And the MiG-21s carried out these repetitive attacks on the Tezgaon airfield, as well as Kurmitola, as well as every other small airfield in East Pakistan. That the squadron of sabers that the Pakistan Air Force had, they didn't have any place to take off from. So that was the on-the-fly change of tactics that the IRF had to do in the eastern sector. Right, in 1971, definitely the speed, the supersonic capabilities, the speed of the MiG-21 was definitely a factor for the Indian Air Force in projecting an offensive capability. Right. Without the MiG-21, if you take the MiG-21 out of our inventory, we only had the Sukhoi 7, which, while some say was a defensive fighter, but it was primarily used as an ground attack aircraft. We never had an aircraft that could catch up with the Starfighters or the Mirage 3s or even the MiG-90s. So the speed of the MiG-21, the supersonic capability of the MiG-21 definitely played a big role. There were many situations where the MiG-21 was able to use its supersonic ability to get out of trouble, and in many cases it was able to use those capabilities to get to catch the enemy. The MiG-21s have been credited with shooting down several starfighters, and that wouldn't have been possible if not for the capability of the MiG-21 to fly at beyond supersonic speeds to catch up with the other targets.
But the glory came with a cost. Decades of service meant wear, aged systems, and limited tech. The MiG-21 earned grim nicknames like the Flying Coffin, and Widowmaker. But was the label deserved? The truth lies in numbers and in context. Not just in tragedy, but in what cause, what conditions, what mitigations were in place.
A lot of times, reputations are made or broken by inadequately informed or ill-informed narratives. And the fact of it was, yes, there's no doubt we have went through a lot of accident, because the MiG-21 wasn't because of the delta wing design. It was designed at a high-speed interceptor, and we flew all kinds of roles with it. First and foremost, I would like to put one record straight, that in Indian Air Force, no pilot gets into an aircraft which is unserviceable. That means when an aircraft is offered to a pilot, it is serviceable from all the benchmark standards laid down of a system which has been checked out. If the aircraft has had a specific problem for which maintenance had or some repairs had been undertaken, that aircraft is not given to anybody and everybody to fly. So there were test pilots and the senior pilots in the squadrons who flew those aircraft. We all used to fly air test sorties, and the senior pilots would come and fly that air test sortie, and if they were not satisfied, would continue getting the aircraft rectified and continue flying till they were satisfied that it is okay for the younger pilots to fly. So that is one understanding which I think everyone needs to understand. Nobody has ever offered another aircraft in Indian Air Force where the aircraft is unserviceable and gone and asked him to fly it. Yes, over a period of time, an aircraft gets old, the system gets older, it becomes more and more difficult to maintain, there becomes more and more maintenance intensive, and the possibility of some system going unserviceable becomes higher. But for that, we are adequately trained. So when people tend to take and the entire accident numbers together, it gives a different picture. Oh, so many aircraft. But so many aircraft in a professional field, when you count aircraft losses or a safety record losses, it's the number of hours which you have flown per accident. So the number of hours we have flown per accident is enormous. So the accident average of the MiG-21 is no more or no less of supersonic fighters of that era, of that vintage. So you have to see it in that balance. Modern aircraft are much safer to fly. They have more redundancies, twin engines. The safety margins are much more. MiG-21s, we didn't have that. So this is where I think the whole difference comes in. And let's face it, I mean, losing people is very a painful thing to the Indian Air Force. It's not just the pilot outside. Imagine the pilot's family, the immediate family, his squadron mates. I mean, we are all like brothers and professionals in arms. I mean, we have sort of been through hell and high water together. So when you lose someone, it hurts always. So some of these emotional hurts, which when it's happened, and on with the families, people have media especially catches on to these emotional aspects and plays on it, and that is what has given the MiG-21s an unfair reputation, which I think was terribly a wrong thing to do. And I want to make it a point to all the media people who have created this image that you've been immensely disrespectful, insensitive to the pilots who have flown this aircraft, who continue to fly this aircraft, and to their families who knew that their husbands or their better halves today are flying this platform. So can you imagine the negative image you have created for the morale of these people who had continued to fly this over the years. This is the level of insensitivity of the media and some vested people who created this whole image and this narrative. I take it very strongly. I think it is a very unfair thing to do, because it is at the end of the day lives of your own citizens, your own sons and daughters now who are at stake. And I don't think that is a good thing to do. I'll rest my case on that.
Again unfortunate, is in a lead-in fighter training role. When we were sending our pilots to become fighter pilots, We used the MiG-21 as that because we did not have an advanced jet trainer. That was again a cause of challenge, because when you move from basic flying aircraft to a MiG-21 for a young 20-21 year old, it's not easy. The pilot does not have enough experience to do that. During the 80s and the 90s, a lot of our aircraft losses were attributed to this. The F-104 Starfighter had a terrible accident track record, because it was also meant to do what the MiG-21 was meant to do, fly like a rocket. Yeah. The US fleet, Pakistan got only a handful of them, but it flew a lot with the US Air Force. And it also had a terrible accident record. In fact, it was the first one to earn the Flying Coffin Widowmaker moniker, not the MiG-21.
But one may ask, what remains after the roar fades? The answer is a legacy of courage. A culture shaped, a template for transformation. The MiG-21 trained generations of fighter pilots in the Indian Air Force. It forced Indian aviation to build ground support, training systems, maintenance chains. It shaped mindsets, discipline, precision, and respect for the machine.
They played a very important role in development of tactics, whether in the strike role, in the air defense role, for interceptions, for developing tactics which were generic to other aircraft. They would play a very important role in dissimilar air combat training, because the MiG-21 was very difficult to spot. So it played an enormous role in that as well. So I think right through, the MiG-21 has been in the backbone of our tactical development and training, and for all that we do in our Air Force.
The MiG-21 coming out in the 1960s and standing up to those Western platforms in the Indian context is an example of East standing up to the West, is an example of Soviet Asian manufactured aircraft going head on head with the West. So I think that is a big legacy of the MiG-21. The MiG-21, as you know, was adapted by the Chinese as well in big numbers, which Pakistan also had. So not only the Indians and the Russians, but the Chinese and the Pakistanis, the MiG-21 legacy is, I think, of the East versus the West from a manufacturing perspective. It will obviously be known for innovation and adaptability. Many pilots, Indian Air Force pilots, have told me that in their interactions with the Russians said, you are using the MiG-21 in ways even we did not envisage. And that is adaptability. That is innovation. I actually go a step further. How do you innovate to do what you have to do? This was not simple fixes. These were doctrinal in nature. How do you fly the aircraft at low level, low speed? How do you use it for fighter recce sorties? How do you attach a camera pod underneath and do a low level flight over Skardu to take photos? So these were true innovations in tactics that came about, and I think that is what it will absolutely be known as.